Expanding Mind with Erik Davis, Thursdays at 2 p.m. on the Progressive Radio Network.
Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, and today we'll have yet another voyage into features of consciousness. It was kind of an interesting synchronicity. The last tune we heard there before the promos before the show, if you're listening to the stream, was the tune from the Wire show with the line, "I got to keep the devil down in the hole." And today, actually, we're going to let the devil out of the hole, or maybe crawl down into the hole with him, because the topic is heavy metal, and particularly that ferocious, nihilistic, and arguably cosmic form of heavy metal known as black metal. I've been a metal fan my whole listening life, and for me it's always been a source for the mythic intuitions and dark cosmic emotions that are part of my own spiritual or cultural aesthetic experience of the world. When I was a rock writer, I wrote quite a bit about metal, and I often wrote about metal that had mystical or mythological themes, even if I wrote about a number of different genres. And it wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago that I actually really got into black metal, very late in the game, but it became an obsession for me for a number of years, and it constituted, between black metal and classical music, I was pretty much covered most of the time, which is a amusing combination. And so I was thrilled beyond expression to see word of a symposium that took place in Brooklyn, I believe it was last year, called Hideous Gnosis, which brought together writers and folks interested in black metal, who were approaching it from a philosophical and also Gnostic and mystical point of view, but in a very intelligent way. And I'm happy that today on the show we have the organizer and one of the participants of that festival, which has also become a gorgeous, wonderful, highly recommended book by the same name of Hideous Gnosis. But before we get to our guests, I want to introduce Expanding Mind's co-host, Maja Daou. Maja, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Erik. How are you?
Pretty good. You're in Los Angeles?
I'm totally in Los Angeles.
Is it still blazing hot as hell down there in Los Angeles?
We just met the devil not too long ago. It was the hottest it has ever been in Los Angeles' history. It was 113 degrees downtown. It was like living in LA hell.
That's pretty insane. And I also happen to know that you too are a heavy metal fan.
I'm a huge heavy metal fan as well. Ever since I was in like 6th grade and I first listened to Metallica, I had a jean jacket that was covered with metal patches and like kind of spiked my hair and drew images of Satan all the time. My mom was really worried about me, but I can easily say
let me ask you, like, in your own personal life, has metal been kind of in some ways part of your interest in the mysteries and spirituality and occultism? I mean, what role has that played?
It played a pretty big role. I mean, a lot of introduction to some of those occult mythological concepts. Like you said, part of your draw to metal was the mythology. I mean, for me, that was a big one too. And with black metal, that's my interest in it, is like with the Kalevala and like these ancient Nordic, Scandinavian mythological themes, to me, is like what really hits me. So it had a big influence on that, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's true to say that that heavy metal is definitely a gateway drug. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our guests. Nicola Masciandaro is the editor and convener of the first of the Hideous Gnosis black metal theory gatherings, and Eugene Thacker is one of the contributors to the volume and who appeared at the festival. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on Expanding Mind.
Thank you. Hi, Erik. Thanks for having us.
Sure. So, Nicola, just tell me a little bit about what motivated the symposium in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
What is black metal theory?
Well, it was motivated, I think, by a desire for some kind of marriage, a black marriage, perhaps, of metal and theory, as an alternative to other forms of academic discourse about metal. And on the website, I try to present this in a kind of a cryptic fashion through a kind of tetralemma or fourfold negation that some of your Buddhist listeners may be familiar with that logical procedure. So I say that black metal theory is not black metal, not theory, not black metal, and not theory. But it's its own enigmatic entity and something new, which I call a theoretical blackening of metal and a metallic blackening of theory. But it's also a participation in what black metal already is as a theoretical experience.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention for listeners that when you say theory, I mean, I understand where you're coming from in terms of, what people describe in academia as, contemporary theory. But for me, one of the things that made this approach fresh is that it was in some ways more classically philosophy. That I felt like in the writings of all of the contributors that I've had a chance to look at, in addition to feeling a very contemporary sense of wrestling with some very profound and actually rather fresh philosophical issues in terms of today, that at the same time I got a sense of a kind of re-engagement with the, if you will, existential or spiritual dimensions of some of these big questions. So I just wanted to emphasize that despite the somewhat pointy-headed sound of theory, that this is not at all a dry exercise for you
I would
people involved in it.
I would argue that music in general, but metal particularly, holds kind of potentiality for returning to an earlier understanding of what theory is as a form of vision, and that certainly in the classical tradition there's the idea, for example, in you see it in the medieval author Macrobius, that music and philosophy, of course, have a shared end, and so theory nowadays often simply connotes a kind of academic cogitation, but it doesn't necessarily get to the desire for immanence that is within theory itself, that is thought as a form of perception. So thinking metal is a kind of an attempt at a theoretical gnosis, that is also like an attempt to articulate what music sees, right? Music now understood beyond the idea of just affective experience, but really music as a form of knowledge.
Yeah, that's I was reading in your piece in the book. You were talking about some of the negative comments you had gotten from people in the scene, which totally makes sense. Most musical scenes have a strong anti-intellectual dimension, and fans kind of resist or are annoyed by academics. And generally, it makes sense because most scholarly interest in quote-unquote popular music takes a very airless kind of dry form, or a sort of pedantic form, or a sort of annoyingly celebratory tone, and a lot of cultural studies is very irritating. But you're talking about something quite different, and it really has to do the way that I experience it as a listener, and particularly as a listener to black metal, which I'll listen to quite loud, almost as a way of like stopping thinking, and yet allowing my emotions of dread and desire and beauty and melancholy to almost kind of well up and take over and take me somewhere, but not just as you say, not just as a form of emotion, but actually as an insight into a possible world, that you're really trying to bring these things together, not to use intellectual or academic or scholarly approaches to dissect or explain but instead to kind of mobilize some of the same forces, images, affects, experiences that's in the music.
Certainly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I want to bring on Eugene here, and we have a bunch of short tracks to play to give people a taste of this music. We haven't really talked about it. Eugene, you're also a professor?
Yeah, I teach at the New School in New York, and like Nicola, I have a background in philosophy and literature, but neither Nicola or I are your maybe typical academic kind of philosophers. We've come to it from, the side door or the back door. So that meant that, we have interest in other media like film and music as well. Mm-hmm. And like Nicola, I've been a long-time listener of metal, but it's an interesting challenge to think along with it and to write about it. One is always, I definitely agree with what Nicola's saying about a lot of academic writing. A lot of cultural studies too. There's always a sense that it's sort of the job of the academic to explain or to interpret or to sort of slap on some kind of a meaning to the music, and it always doesn't seem to quite work for me. On the other hand, a lot of these musical forms are so powerful and that they sort of evoke kind of new ideas and new ways of thinking and so on, that it almost compels us to write about it. So one is always in an interesting position when you're writing about music in that sense.
Yeah.
Well, and it's tricky too, and like it says in the book, how the first rule about black metal is you don't talk about black metal, because it's like once you name the thing, it's no longer the thing. And there's I talked with a friend of mine about this, how do you even describe music in the first place? People always use other music as descriptive terms, it's kind of Jane's Addiction-y or Grateful Dead-y or whatever. Then that removes it from the actual process of what the music was in the first place. So with black metal, you guys are kind of served with this further dilemma in writing about it, that you're removing yourself from it and that process that it stands for in the first place, which is to be that thing that is not.
But that places one right away in the position of the traditional mystic,
right?
Who, in order to say something about their object, God or reality or what have you, they have to unsay.
Yeah.
They have to unsay their own, their own language. So I think there is a kind of natural mysticism to writing about music as an impossible endeavor.
Yeah, it's also quite a poetic inspiration as well. I mean, even though I worked in music journalism for many years, and so I was cranking out record reviews or whatever, it was always extremely important for me not to, as much as possible, not really pigeonhole and not sort of take the distant position of the critic putting things in order, but instead to mostly write about things that really moved me and to try to use language in a way to evoke, not just to explain or to categorize. I mean, I was doing it generally in a less philosophical vein, although sometimes with some things I was able to go, in the directions you guys have. But I think it's a marvelous challenge for writing, because the very process that you guys are talking about, which is how you deal, or a theme that threads throughout the whole discussion, how do you deal with the world that is beyond everything that we can think or say or understand or perceive? How do we relate to that outside? In a way, is foregrounded in the act of writing about music, where you're writing about something that is always going to exceed. It's always going to stand outside your representations in your language.
Yeah, and definitely we have to also remember that as a subculture, especially heavy metal is traditionally a very sort of lowbrow genre that often resists lending itself to being discussed and so on. And I think one of the interesting things about the Hideous Gnosis project was that there's a sense that everybody sort of wants to move beyond this kind of high-low divide or split and find other ways of thinking alongside the music.
Right.
Well, I want to get into some of our tracks. Eugene, you have a number that you've brought along, and these are short clips. And this is also might be good for some listeners who are unfamiliar with black metal as a particular genre, because you have some examples of some old school stuff. So do you want to just introduce the tracks you brought and talk a little bit about why you wanted to show it, or what you wanted to bring forward with these samples?
Sure. I guess we'll start with the first one, which is by a band from Norway called Dark Throne. And I picked this because I felt it was sort of a good example of Norwegian black metal, which I guess now is kind of becoming old school. But this was mostly in the early 90s, centered in Oslo and Bergen, and sort of a subculture developing out of that area. And Dark Throne, along with other bands such as Mayhem or Emperor, Burzum, and so on, this was a group of bands working in Norway that was influenced by heavy metal generally, but was really interested in bands that were more obscure in the mid and late 80s, such as Bathory or Celtic Frost. A touchstone for many of those bands is an album by the British group Venom from 1982 that's called Black Metal. And this is, a lot of people, cite this as one of the important early kind of instances of the phrase appearing. But Dark Throne, I think, is really interesting because it's been the same two guys from the very beginning, and they're still just churning out albums, and they're drawing some different influences, but it's pretty much just straight up black metal sound. So maybe we can listen to the clip and then talk a little bit about the sound itself afterwards.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely sounds like a creature.
I have to say it's so bizarre to hear that track over the radio through the phone.
Yeah, it sounds pretty weak.
It's interesting. I mean, a couple of things. Probably, the first thing you notice is just this sort of wall of sound, just like this sheer wall of dense noise that assaults you. And this is characteristic of a lot of the music during this period. You've got rapid-fire drums, often without any breaks, which I think is pretty interesting. You have a heavy emphasis on rhythm guitars, often with the absence of any guitar solo. I think that's a pretty kind of significant choice considering the metal genre generally. Mm-hmm. The vocals sound like orcs or banshees, or there's something kind of unhuman about the vocals. And I think an interesting thing is that the production level is very low tech. So, it's not as if, actually, if you listen to it at home, it would probably sound just like what we heard. And part of that, I think, was just the material constraints of the bands. It was very much DIY. But if you read interviews, they actually have made kind of aesthetic choices to utilize really low-tech, kind of low-budget recording technologies to obtain what they call a necro sound, almost like the music itself is kind of distorting or breaking down the tape or the CD itself. And so all of those things, when you listen to the tracks, it's metal, but it's very different than early Black Sabbath, for instance, which is very much influenced by the blues, or the new wave of British heavy metal, Judas Priest and so on, which is much more operatic and much more virtuosic and so on. So it's identifiable as metal, but then it has this very distinct kind of low-tech necro sound as well.
Wonderful. Well, let's move on to the next track you have, just so we can hear as much as possible.
Sure. Is this Nort? I forget which one I put on.
Doden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nort.
So this is an example of something more recent, and metal, like all these genres, has all these subgenres as well. So this is an example I chose of what's often called doom metal or funeral metal. And I guess the track is pretty self-explanatory. Nort, this particular group, is a one-man band from Denmark, and this is from a 2005 album called Gudsforladt, which translates as God Forsaken.
All right. I had one question about there seems to be a lot of acts that are like one-man bands. There's something about that situation, even though the music has drums and guitars and vocals or whatever, that a lot of one-man bands are out there. What do you think about, what is it about that one person and this music that seems to fit?
Well, it's definitely a theme of, I guess, solitude, in a sense, and in that way too, it maybe dovetails to a lot of the writing and the mystical traditions, that there's very much a sense of a single person, perhaps melodramatically undergoing these sort of spiritual crises and then working through them, and then the music is sort of the product of that, and even the imagery in terms of the album covers and so on, and photos of the band member. It's very much an isolated person in the middle of a forest somewhere, and really has that theme of solitude, I think, as well as on a maybe more material and political level, is very much this sort of, again, DIY approach, and that you do everything. And a lot of the groups, the projects, refuse to even play live or tour, and so it has this it's very counterintuitive to the music industry in that sense as well.
What was it about that track that interested you?
This track, in terms of doom metal or funeral metal, obviously the pacing is slow, it's lethargic, it's the heavy side of heavy metal. You also hear a lot more atmospheric, even ambient kind of soundscapes that you didn't hear so much in the early 90s, and almost taking on this perhaps epic or symphonic kind of tone. And then the themes, melancholy, sorrow, despondency, gravity, and so on is very much a part of the genre itself. And what's interesting is that some of the music actually bleeds over into other genres, into dark ambient or even industrial or other genres. And I always think that's interesting when you start to see genres bleeding into each other.
Well, one of the things that I really react to with tracks like the Nort one is just, and I don't know whether this says more about my imagination or about the music, but it's so richly and almost instantaneously conjures up these scenes in my head of northern, fjords or dark forests devoid of man, and slow creaking glacial cracks, and it's so full of a kind of natural romance. And again, you can talk about, is that because I have associations? Where do those images come from? Nonetheless, there is clearly a really powerful sort of sense of nature that comes through some of this music, and of course in the imagery as well. But it's actually in sounds almost, I want to say, in a kind of naive way, but I really hear it.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's going too far at all to make the link to a certain kind of romanticism, and even quite literally. This kind of music goes incredibly well with, Goethe or Byron or some of the graveyard poets or something like that. It's really almost very much kind of into that dark or black romanticism.
Well, let's hear the third track you got lined up. This is one of my favorite black metal bands, Ulver. Tell us, what album is this from?
It's from an album from 1995 called Geweldsanger, which translates roughly as Twilight Songs. And yeah, I agree with you. Ulver is one of the more interesting and perhaps anomalous groups to come out of the genre. I say anomalous because they've quickly sort of departed from the strict metal genre and have been experimenting a lot. And they've done everything from electronica to ambient to soundtrack work to avant prog rock. I mean, the only thing they haven't done maybe is a hip-hop album, I think. They've really done that. But, you know, when you listen to all these albums, there's definitely a thread which is maybe more in their mood. And you know, even it's always very dark and brooding and so on. But this album, I couldn't help but to put on. It's one of my favorites of theirs. I remember first getting it and expecting to hear something like Dark Throne, the first sample we heard. And they have actually produced albums like that, so I was expecting that. And instead, I heard this album, and this track that we're going to listen to now.
So that is definitely not the kind of music we've been listening to.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard that track, you know, I thought it was just an intro, and then at any second they were just going to burst in with the wall of noise, kind of. And I realized suddenly that, oh, the whole album is like this. And once I got to that point, I really started to appreciate it. I mean, I often think that this is the most black metal album I've heard in a weird way, because, you know, the songs are adapted from Norwegian folk songs, first of all. Their imagery is very much sort of Norse mythology. Ulver, you know, the name itself in Norwegian means wolves, and so lycanthropy is a big theme of theirs. And it's unplugged. You know, you have this image of a couple of guys in the cabin in the woods next to a fire or something, just, you know, playing this, and it's literally a cappella, guitar, flute, and then a bit of subtle percussion, and that's really it for the whole album. And it's the only one they've done like that, so I think it's a really interesting example. It's not at all in the genre, but in many ways it's the best example at the same time.
Well, it's funny too, because Ulver actually like separated themselves from black metal at one point, right? They actually said publicly, like, we are not black metal, except kind of we are, but only for fun, a little bit. Yeah, and I think that you know, on the one hand, you can hear elements of this music in their later work. They did an album called Perdition City in the late 90s, and it's very urban and electronica driven, but it's like taking the black metal vibe into the city, kind of, and it's very noir and so on.
I think it also just shows how that there's, you know, like in all genres, but in, you know, particularly this one, because of the importance of being authentic and really going for it and not being cheesy and genre driven, that there's a desire to, like, as soon as the thing gets established, it's like, how do we break it up? How do you keep it moving forward? How do you not have it turn into another kind of carnival of silliness? Well, we're halfway through the show, so it's time to take a break. You're listening to Expanding Mind with Erik Davis and Masciandaro. We're talking about black metal with Hideous Gnosis contributors, and we'll be right back after these messages.
You are listening to PRN, Progressive Radio Network.
I'm Carol Brouillet, host of Community Currency on Progressive Radio Network every Thursday, 5 to 6 p.m. Please join us as we connect people, ideas, important information, and discover solutions to some of the most urgent problems facing us. Every Thursday, 5 to 6 p.m., Community Currency on Progressive Radio Network.
The shaky economy, peak oil, and now an unstable climate. Get the inside story with Alex Smith on Radio EcoShock. Top scientists find a looming catastrophe while activists try for change. Experts, authors, and alternative media from around the world and around the corner. Hear it all. Radio EcoShock every Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Listen free and live free right here on PRN, ProgressiveRadioNetwork.com.
Freedom News Hour will bring you up to date on the latest news on the financial meltdown.
Begin restoring local community. It can happen.
We'll be exploring the issues from a freedom-oriented, small government perspective.
I'm Walt Thiessen.
I'm Melinda Pillsbury Foster.
I am Jake Town.
Join us live Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on ProgressiveRadioNetwork.com.
This is PRN, the Progressive Radio Network.
Welcome back to Expanding Mind on the Progressive Radio Network. We're here with Erik Davis and myself, Masha Daoud. And we're speaking with some contributors to Hideous Gnosis, and we're talking about black metal. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the deepest implication philosophically about black metal, which is the blackness. And a lot of people just affiliate it kind of with Satanism, and I thought, Eugene, in your article, you did a really good job going into that. But I really enjoyed Nicola's article about talking about how it's a return to nothingness and kind of going back to the source and back to the beginning, because for me, that's like really the heart of all esoteric and occult ideas. In fact, the word occult means to occult, or like eclipse or blacken something, really, and how people forget that black is that prima materia, the nothing that contains all things, and that, you know, that thing that contains all the colors and that potential for everything, and that kind of nigredo and womb and darkness of creation stage, which I think the black metal folks really dive into that philosophy and go into the blackness and into the darkness. And Nicola, I was hoping if you could kind of maybe talk a little bit about that for people that don't know that about black metal, how you would describe that sort of black darkness of that philosophy of the gnosis.
Right. Well, on the one hand, black signifies the absence of everything, right? Mm-hmm. But by the same virtue, it is this kind of ultimate substance. It is a substantial black entity, if you will. And so the idea, certainly the alchemical idea of nigredo, that's, I think, corresponds to the first step of the alchemical work. The decay that has to precede real creation. In my own piece, I really take up the idea that black metal is aimed at destroying the cosmos, which is also a Gnostic idea. But I'm primarily, sort of began with what may appear as a kind of fantasy, this idea that metal actually attacks the world, destroys the world, decays the world, or it's a decaying kind of sound. And I hear some beeping. So actually, we saw this in the two songs that Eugene selected. This positioning of the music on the other side of a kind of impossible event. So the first song by Dark Throne is just a repetition of the word when the sun has died, when the angels are blind, when the fog lies thick over the palace of God. But this is a sentence that is never completed, right? So in a way, it's black metal is aiming for what comes after, sort of after the ultimate death. which is on the one hand total annihilation. There's nothing, and on the other hand, it's the possibility of something absolutely unforeseeable.
Well, so, that element of possibility seems really key. I mean, one of the things that I think is important to bring forward here is the fact that, on the surface you can say, look, I don't understand. What does all this nihilism have to do with spirituality or with wrestling with authenticity? It looks like it's just negative and it's pessimistic and it's dark and what's satanic. How could this possibly be part of something that's not just reactive or rebellious or even just kind of nasty and crude? And it's not at all. There's something extremely powerful about that drive towards the nothing. And you earlier had mentioned, some of the tradition of saints who approached mysticism through negation, through saying that we can't give it any content, we can't say what it is, because the minute we do that, we've lost it. So I would love it if you could talk a little bit about, well, I mean, to put it in simple terms, the spirituality of this music and of this way of talking or approaching this music, because you go to quite profound places in your article. I'd love to hear that.
Well, I think it has to be a kind of anti-spirituality, just as black metal is intellectually anti-intellectual. There has to be this. It works through this operative refusal of every term, but which is enormous. A refusal that is enormously creative. So I would want to think about it first in terms of just almost like grammar, like the concept of the unholy. What does it do when, what happens when you negate the holy? What sort of spirituality is that? It's obviously a relation to a term for the sacred. But the negation, in a way, preserves what is being negated and destroys it simultaneously. So.
Yeah, that's a good approach to the dynamic. But I also know you've set some tracks up as well.
Certainly.
So I'd love to start going through them. I think it's a wonderful way of talking about this music. So why don't you introduce the first track you selected?
Okay. Well, the first one I picked was a band from Colorado called Nightbringer. The song is entitled "I Am I," off the album Apocalypse Sun. I think it's their latest album. To me, this is a band that has a sound which is sort of, I think of as sort of exemplary American occult black metal. They're also, I think, one of the main forces behind an annual gathering in the mountains of Colorado called the Gathering of Shadows, which has been held a few times, where it's basically a small black metal festival which takes place in a sylvan setting, and so there's sort of certainly evokes the possibility of a kind of American nature mysticism that we might also associate with the Cascadian metal bands. Except what appeals to me in Nightbringer is that they really are darker than that. It's not eco-metal. There's no sense of a sort of natural preservationalism or sort of a return to nature. But it's more, this song in particular seems to, sound like the rending of the fabric of the cosmos.
All right, well, let's hear it.
I'm going to play it.
Great track.
Yeah.
So good.
So what he's saying in those few seconds there is, I am I, apotheosis, crowned with the black sun nimbus of 7 immolating rays. And I guess what I would point out is that here the singer is sort of in the role of a magus or priest who is actually presiding over a kind of ritual, which in this song has to do with this kind of tetragrammatic statement, right? I am I am God, I am the one who I am, or whatever.
Well, and the black sun also is one of the more esoteric concepts in alchemy, that very few people kind of get into. I mean, it's that literal kind of tantric death going into the shamanic initiation part, which is pretty heavy.
But what I hear, I think it's, I'm not really, very booked up on the mythology and the traditions, but if we would think of just phenomenally how the kind of the words and the poetry become operative, like when he's singing rays, 7 immolating rays, there's this, it sort of communicates a space where speaking the thing is restored to the thing, right? That the words are the rays, An
invocation.
Yeah, so that I would say, maybe as part of a broader, desire within ritual practice, right? You're doing something, but the doing of it is this participation in this event, which is always going on, but it's also making it happen.
Yeah, well, one of the things I got from that as well, from that image of rays, is the way that music is a kind of energy. Like you just literally, you're sitting there and there's vibrations coming off the speakers or the stacks in a hall, and it's like radiating through the space. And especially ferocious, overwhelming, intense music, you really sense it as a kind of physical presence. So the image of the black sun is actually really appropriate for the if you will, the positive side of this music. It's not just about negation or nihilism or breaking or avoiding any kind of meaning or anything. There is also this positive presence, but it's like it's a black sun. It's radiating. It's trying to be its own sun.
Well, there's a kind of eclipse.
And it comes through really strong.
It's the eclipse. Yeah.
I mean, I'd say sound in general tends to kind of eclipse the presence of an outside. It becomes a kind of total. I mean, Nietzsche said this, when he says that's what's so great about sound, that in it we forget that there is no outside. That's from Zarathustra. But
and it's also like we talked about before, how the eclipse is the ultimate alchemical achievement, right? The joining of the sun and moon. It's when the two become one, and it is actually that moment when the inside and the outside are the same thing. So it is literally that there is no outside because they've both been joined.
Well, great. Let's move on to the next track.
So the next one that I chose from Inquisition, a band originally from Colombia, I believe. I think it's two brothers. Who currently live in eastern Washington, so that's old haunting grounds of mine, so I kind of have a special affection for them. But the song is Unholy Magic Attack off the album Into the Infernal Regions of the Ancient Cult. Okay. So I think what I would point to first in this song is this pummeling drive. I mean, Inquisition, they rock in a way that much of classic black metal doesn't. And it's actually close. Their sound is actually close to grind in some ways. Bands like Bolt Thrower have this kind of rhythmic churning sound. And they also demonstrate
very particular about the vocals as well. Like the Legions of Goblins vibe is even stronger than you find in a lot of tunes. What do you think is going on with a lot of the vocal sound? Like the what you can't quite hear the words, you can a little bit. There's something. There's high pitched. It's not growling. It's what give me a little sense of how you read some of these vocal stylings.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've written about elsewhere, but I think it partly has to do with the kind of torturing of the word, which means drawing it out as you would like on a rack, so that the different dimensions of language are in this tension. So it's not about just making sound out of words. It's as much about understanding the words, but sort of simultaneously not hearing them in their normal form. And returning, in a sense, returning the meaning of the word to the space of the scream, of a kind of a more primal voice.
One of the things that really stands out for me is the difference between, let's say, a typical black metal voice like the ones we've heard today, and in a way the more familiar so-called Cookie Monster voice of associated with death metal, where you have a really low guttural kind of force. And what's interesting is how much, even though you'd think sort of initially that lower, more bear-like sound would have more force. In a way, to me, it's less eerie, it's less uncanny, it's more predictable in a sense, because it's easier to locate. It's just kind of a low register. It's the low, it's the sound of the depths. But this sort of mid-range, screechy, more scream-like sound is actually much more disturbing, and for me has much more openness about the associations with it. So it always struck me as interesting the way that those different, to overly simplify, but the way that those different frequencies have taken on different meanings in this music.
Right. I mean, just to return to one of Eugene's points, I'd say that the black metal voice in general evokes a sort of voice of the undead, as opposed to the voice of the animal. I mean, death metal voice is sort of like alligators from a swamp, singing or something.
That's a great way to look at it.
Part of it, too, relates to something else that Eugene mentioned in his article about demons and, like, discerning exactly what is the identity of a demon. Is it something that's inside of us, something that's outside of us, something that's evil or helpful or willful? And part of that you can kind of hear in the different styles of singing, because some of them actually sound like they're a little possessed by something
because the voice is also,
it's
become multiple, right? That's the classic articulation of the way possession presents itself through voice, as in the famous Exorcist movie and so forth, or the story of the Gerasene demoniac who says, "I am Legion." Right.
Yeah. And that idea of getting possessed by something else taking over you has always fascinated me in the way that, especially black metalists, vocalize their songs, because this is a sound that you would never hear when they were talking to their mom. I mean, maybe they do or something, but it's literally like they're accessing this other realm or potentiality that exists within their vocal cords because they're making it happen. But it takes that kind of like possession to activate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sense in which the voice itself is conjured and participates in the whole displacement of identity, the sort of shamanistic practice of the corpse paint and going by another name, not being oneself. Or
here's a question for you. I mean, and maybe you know or don't know. And it's always, I mean, in a way, it's a tough one to ask. But we've talked about the ritual elements of this music. It's clearly very evocative. It can be very overwhelming. It can have this element of possession or this element of real transcendence. How would you say, in terms of there's the legion of bands out there. A lot of them are doing it as a genre. They're just playing rock and roll on some basic level. They're invested in it to some degree. And then there are, on the other side, you have people who are deeply interested in the psychic ritual, mystical experiences that are capable through actually playing the music. Do you think that's an important question to ask? Is it important to emphasize how seriously some bands take this, or how do you deal with this sort of question of like how are the bands themselves really experiencing or exploring the potentialities of this music?
Well, I mean, it seems that you're posing the question sort of in terms of the authenticity of the intention behind it, and I think that the black metal genre in general sort of willfully obfuscates that on the one hand there's the kind of classic cultivation of an occult persona, like the black metal musician who's being interviewed and who has trouble answering questions and saying anything about his music or turning the question back on the interviewer and so forth, sort of preserving his own unknowability, all in the name of a serious kind of cult, right? On the other hand, black metal is also funny and performative and self-conscious, and I just think it's for me it's not an important distinction at all. I think black metal is can be sort of deadly serious and carnival simultaneously without any problem whatsoever. And the problem is more in reception and really how it's being used. What are you doing with the music? I think that's really the primary determination as to whether it's serious or not.
I think that's true, but I think there's also a way in which, all musics have their completely devoted, unsilly fans. Sure. But there's a way in which the music allows, not because necessarily the bands claim authenticity, but there's where the language of the music itself allows a space for a kind of intimacy with affect, with even philosophical perspectives that have, I would argue, a lot more substance than most musics that are available to your average pop consumer. And so there is an interesting way in which, without falling into the trap of being overly literalistic or overly identified with authenticity, there is a kind of, whether it's the romanticism, whether it's the intensity of the nihilistic dimension of it, but there's a way in which the music does allow a certain kind of seriousness in its experience that I think sets it apart and makes it very unusual in some ways. But I think
what goes to preserve that kind of dialectically within, say, the black metal scene is this like dependability of these sort of basic concepts of music as like it's brutal, it's raw, it's just really good, like head-banging music. And so by being that, it can also be whatever else you want it to be.
I got that. That's true. Well, we're marching towards the end here. Okay. And I wanted to let you play your final track.
Okay, so the final track is from also a one-man band, we could say, another black metal anchorite from China called Heartless. The song is called Journey to Eternal off the album Suicidal Engagement. And I think I've chosen it as a good example of suicidal black metal, melancholic, black metal, but not in the romantic sense, but really in this sort of, very Catholic kind of despair.
All right, well, let's hear it.
Okay. Okay, so, when I said Catholic despair, I guess that probably wasn't very clear. What I meant was despair in really in the strong, kind of medieval sense of spiritual suicide. And the voice, the voice in this song is obviously different from what we heard before. It has almost a kind of infantile timbre, right? A kind of pathetic crying, which is, some other songs in other bands one sees, also. And many of the lyrics in Heartless's songs also are, they can be explicitly about killing oneself and so forth, or there's another song called Incurable Disease, where the subject seems to be sort of just rotting away, and he expresses his final wish is to drink his own blood. And so this sort of turning of the self against the self, but in this interminable way, is what I find compelling. Really
and that does actually become a reality for some of these, particularly obviously death metal bands, but also black metal bands, is that there is that aspect that some of them kill themselves or kill each other,
sure.
And that again makes it not just this kind of conversation in the music, but it's part of their reality. And with the suicidal metal, it is like they're having an existential melancholy. It's not just like they're kind of singing about it. It's a reality for them.
Yeah, it's probably not incidental that there are many suicidal black metal bands from China, which last I heard has a very high suicide rate. But I guess why I find this form of music compelling is its expression of a kind of ecstatic self-mourning. I'm currently working on a book called The Sorrow of Being, which is basically a commentary on this definition of mystical sorrow as the sorrow that one is. Right? It's a mourning the fact of one's own existence, and so this music voices that kind of sorrow, which is.
We've reached the end of our show here, so I just wanted to wrap up and thank Nicola and Eugene for showing up here. I want to remind folks that Hideous Gnosis is available. It's a very beautiful book as well as a fascinating one. Guys, thanks so much for preparing the clips. It's just been a really great show. And if you have any other things you want to point people to, URLs or whatever, let me know.
Sure. Well, there is going to be another symposium in London, organized by Scott Wilson and Niall Scott, who were participants in the event last year. It's going to, and it's also going to feature a musical performance by a band Abgott, who are actually going to be composing some work on the theme of the symposium, which is called melanchology. So we're going to be looking at the ecological, the blackening of ecology through metal theory.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Erik. Thanks, Eugene.
Yeah, see you, Nicola.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.